And specifically in this episode, we're going to take a look at, introducing some of the topics that we're going to be covering over this episode and the episodes coming up. And here to help us with that, of course, is Mr. Adam Gordon. How you doing, Adam?
Good. I'm feeling real short as I was signaling there. I'm like, you look at you, you're like, and you're taller than me, but I feel like I'm standing in a hole. That's how small I feel.
I've got my lifters. I've got my lifters on today.
I got to go put my platform shoes on while we take a break. I'm feeling really a little bit minimized here. Anyway, it's good to be back with all of you here at IT Pro TV. Looking forward to spending some time talking about certified ethical hacking with you. New version 9, very exciting. Better than 8, not as good as 10, but certainly very good. We're going to talk about all that. I sound like Donald Trump, don't I? Anyway, let's talk a little bit about some of the stuff we're going to cover here in our intro to ethical hacking conversations. We're going to take a look at some of the background material that you want to be aware of. We're going to define some terms for you. Mike's going to take us on a little field trip. Hopefully you all have your permission slips signed and partners picked out. We're going to be taking a look at some resources out on the web that would be valuable for you as a security professional, certainly, and as somebody who ultimately is looking to get certified in ethical hacking. We would want to make sure you're aware of resources such as data breach information. What's going on out there from a trend perspective? What are the kind of websites we may want to look at to do some research? What are some information security standards that we may want to be aware of that would help us as ethical hackers, as security professionals, to be better prepared to counsel our clients, our customers, and those that we are trying to defend as opposed to those that we're trying to defend against, and the information we need to do that. What are tools that are going to be valuable that we want to build into what I'll just generically refer to, and we'll talk a lot about over the time we're together, as the toolkit that the CEH, a certified ethical hacker, wants to ultimately have and carry with them as they go out into the world and try to take on the bad guys and the bad girls and the people that are looking to do us harm. We have to be prepared. And the ultimate goal of a certified ethical hacker, of any security professional, but especially somebody who goes to the time and trouble of learning how to become an ethical hacker, seeks to ultimately work through the material that is out there, go through the exam, the CEH exam with EC Council, and become certified, is to build up knowledge, but also to have access to tools. And tools becomes very important for us, or become very important for us, as we think about what are the mechanisms, what are the methods, what are the things that we need to do to be better than those that are hoping to take our information, our systems, and the services they provide away from us, and also from our customers. And so we're going to focus on how to build that toolkit. Where do you find these tools that we're going to demo? All the tools we're going to talk about, not without exception, but the majority of them are available free. A lot of them you could just simply download and use. Some you may need to download, demo, and then if you like, you may need to buy. We'll talk about that, obviously, in the sense that, hey, here's a website. You want to go look at LandGuard, for instance, or you want to go look at Tenable, or any of these massive information management and scanning and information security systems that are available, many cloud-enabled today, and you want to use them, there's usually a demo available. Nessus is a good example. It used to be a tool that you could use essentially locally free of charge. It was bought several years back. The company is now a major information security product from the enterprise perspective. You have to go out and sign up for a demo at the website to be able to use the product. And if you like it, you should consider whether or not it makes sense for you to use. But there's always an alternative, meaning there's usually a tool that you can find that will do most, if not everything, that that tool or any of those tools do, without necessarily having to spend a lot of your organization's money to get to that place. And we'll talk about a lot of tools that are available free of charge, because I think it's very important, as I've talked about in some of the other episodes we've done in other subject areas, that you always have access to tools that you can use, you can spend time with, and you can learn to use effectively, but not have to spend a lot of money. Security, information security in particular, should be something that is available to everybody. I think it's something that ultimately should not be limited by the amount of money or the amount of time an institution can or cannot spend to defend themselves. And we'll take the approach that we want to show you how to do that and how to use a mixture of systems and tools in order to be able to accomplish that goal. So we'll be going through some of these things. We'll take a look at the elements of information security. We'll talk about security threat and attack vectors. What are they? How do we define them? Why are they important to be aware of? What are some of the things that we should be concerned about? Got a little vocabulary list that we'll take a look at, help you understand some terms. Mike may even put up a flashcard or two, and he may even dress up and do some crazy things, I heard tell. tell. I'm not sure, but I heard a rumor that he was planning on impersonating some sort of a security system and dressing up accordingly. Have you ever seen those commercials for GameFly, by the way? The network where the postal guy keeps delivering the games, and the guy or the kid, there's like a few different ones, the guy comes out dressed as like the character every time, and at the end of the one with the older guy that's there, he's dressed up as like the piece from, what's that game? Tetris,
yes,
I think, right? And the guy says, "Oh, old school," and the guy's like all dressed up in the thing, and he looks like a piece out of the Rubik's Cube. It's really funny. We're digressing. We'll get back to what we're here to talk about. Anyway, we'll take a look at all this and more, and we're going to start in by talking about some of the things that are going on out there today. And today being a relative thing, obviously, we put content together for you. We spend time in the studio putting it together. It's fresh and available at that moment in time. Some of the things like the hacking trends we're going to talk about right now are, of course, contextual, right? They're important right now at this moment in time. If you're watching this episode 6 months or a year after we put it together, they're still important. They're still very telling for you with regards to trends, but they may not be as up to date. They may not be as accurate as some of the stuff that we talk about at the moment that we're talking about it now. So keep in mind that we're going to show you some websites, talk about places to find things. We always encourage you to go out and find the latest information. Just make sure you update that thought process. If there's a new report, take a look at it. If there's a new information item on that trend list, make sure you're aware of that. That's the most important takeaway from the conversation. So if we can go to Mike's machine for a minute, we have a couple of websites/reports. We just want to show you. When we think about becoming a certified ethical hacker, one of the first things we have to think about is awareness of the trends that are going on in the industry today and more broadly just in the world today. Mike and I were talking about this right before we came online today to do this episode with you, the fact that everything is so interconnected. I was mentioning to Mike that I had a student in one of my classes that was attending from very far away. In Africa, of all places. She was attending one of my online classes and was not always there, and I didn't realize at the time that she wasn't actually in the U.S. And after the class, she got in touch with me and said, "Hey, I was successful. Just wanted to thank you. And oh, by the way, I live in this country in Africa, and as a result, I'm not able to attend normally. And the videos and the recordings are very helpful. Just wanted to thank you for all that information." And it's really a very different world than it was 5, even 10 years ago with the advent of the cloud and things like that. And these trend reports that we're going to point out to you are very helpful for the average security professional because they aggregate, they bring together a lot of data that is going to be important for us to be aware of. But as a security professional practicing in the United States, as I am, as many of you may be, you may not understand what's going on in Eastern Europe or in Asia or in Africa or Latin America with the kind of things that are in these reports because you may only see your little slice of the world today. Unless you work for a company that is global in scope, that has organizational infrastructure in various countries, you may not really know what's going on in the world there or localized in that area. So reports like, I think this is the IBM Cloud data study, right? Or the cost of data breach study, rather. So, you can go out to websites, and I know Mike, as we always will put the URLs for these particular reports up, but all we did to find them was simply go to Google and do a search for data breach 2016 or data breach information, and you'll get a list of the top 5 or 10 reports that are available. IBM is on that list. The Ponemon Institute is on that list. I believe we have the Verizon DBIR report there. The one from Blue Code is there, right? So there's a lot of different reports that you can take a look at as Mike's kind of just jumping around and showing you. And any one of these, as you can see, will be valuable for you. A lot of them you have to just give your registration information before you can download the report. None of them cost money, just to be clear. They're free. You just have to register to see them. But you should take a look at one or more of them. A couple of reasons for that. Number one, as a CEH candidate, as somebody that wants to become certified in ethical hacking, it's very important for you to understand what's going on in the world with regards to the trends, so you understand the kind of hacking incidents that may be occurring. You have a better understanding of what you may be up against in terms of having to defend, but also what you may have to think about doing to penetration test, vulnerability assess, in order to make sure that you can essentially understand the liability, the impact, the exposure that your company has, or whatever company you happen to be working for has, and as a result, manage risk. And almost everything we talk about in this episode and any episode throughout the entire body of work we're going to put together around this topic for CEH version 9 is first and foremost focused on managing risk, understanding how to mitigate or manage risk down in the organization. It's so critical today that we're able to do that. And really the goal, primary goal of being a CEH, being a certified ethical hacker, is to understand how to take on those risks, turn them around, and then defend against them within the organization through the application of best practices, through the application of policy, process, procedure, to implement a standard, and then to manage it down through the organization, and then to use tools, techniques, and technology to be able to, that was a triple T, by the way, in case you didn't pick that up, in order to be able to, apply that information. We look at what's going on in the hacker community. We learn, in other words, from those events, and then we try to take that information, turn it around in some way to be able to make that into information that we can use from the defensive perspective to, as a result, go on the offensive, if you will, right? And to be able to apply that knowledge proactively to our networks to ensure that we're not falling prey to these kind of circumstances. Doesn't work, by the way, in every case, right? And I want to be clear. A lot of the techniques we'll talk about here, a lot of the things that we're going to do here will primarily, if done correctly, help you to be more effective at applying security and best practices and something, a lot of times people say, oh, can I hack-proof my network? I don't think you can hack-proof anything. I think you can take steps to minimize the potential opportunity for somebody to break into your system or network or whatever it may be if you are willing to go to that time and trouble. But unless you maintain that effort, unless you are vigilant, unless you constantly assess where you are, read up, as we were talking about, on certain trends and understand how to apply that knowledge, it becomes very difficult for you to say, we were just talking about this before we came online as well, hey, I've got this content, I'm going to put it out there, and it's going to be good forever. No, you've got this content, in this case, this knowledge, you're going to apply it to your systems, whatever the particular skill we're talking about may be, and it's good for right now, and it may be good for a long time. Certain things don't change. IPv4, as an example, has been the same since somebody came up with the original RFC for IP back in the late 1970s, right? And that thought process has not changed. It's always been a 32-bit address. It's always gotten or had certain rules applied with it. Even in the face of IPv6, IPv4 is still the same. So knowledge of that basic concept of the understanding of networking, in other words, has basically been static for 30, 40 some odd years now. But what we do with it and the depth we go to understand packet crafting, packet manipulation, fragmentation, being able to test using certain flags and setting them or turning them off to see the results of that from a scan against a machine to understand what operating system may or may not be there, what we call operating system fingerprinting, and we'll take a look at that and talk about that in upcoming episodes. That knowledge is very important, and some of it's static. A TCP scan hasn't really changed all that much in the last 30 or 40 years. A SYN scan hasn't really changed. An XMS scan is still pretty much an XMS scan. Turn everything on, see what happens. But the reality is what does change is the behavior of the targeted system and what it tells us with regards to that information. And if we don't keep up on that and keep that knowledge fresh over time, it's going to be very important for us to understand, for you to understand, that if you don't do that, the knowledge becomes perishable, it becomes stale, and essentially you're caught in a vacuum. And if you're not able to refresh that knowledge, the protections you're applying become less and less relevant to the systems that you are defending over time. And so we just want to think about that, just want to make sure we're comfortable with that. We have a sense of that, and of course, we think about some of the most recent breaches that have occurred. And again, recent is relative. But in the last couple of years, right, if you think about some of the major breaches that have gone on, you can think about the Home Depot breach that occurred. You can think about the Target breach in the United States. You can think about JP Morgan Chase. You can think about Apple and iCloud. All of this happened in 2014, 2015, and 2016 over the last few years. You can think about some of the more recent ones. Twitter was just hacked in the last week or so, right? And they had a major issue. And so we want to think about that and be aware of the fact that this is an ongoing issue. This is not something that goes away, not something that changes just once in a while. This is changing constantly. The threat landscape is evolving. One of the very interesting trends we're seeing now more and more in the industry is that a lot of the attacks that we thought traditionally had kind of gone away and had been dealt with from a variety of perspectives because of the march of technology have been coming back again. And we're seeing a lot of old school, right, attacks coming back and becoming more relevant in the hacking community because, number one, we think, and I think the analysis bears out the fact that a lot of security professionals that remember how to deal with these things are just not practicing anymore. And so, unfortunately, a lot of that knowledge has left our community. Number two, low and slow attacks, which is what we often refer to them as, fragmentation attacks, for instance, and attacks that allow us to propagate attack vectors and attack packets through a system in such a way that they're very difficult to scan for, have really never gone away, but they're becoming more prevalent again. And the problem is our technology has not always been updated. So our firewalls, our IDSs, our IPSs, our IDPSs, right? All the gateway systems we use have really never been redesigned or designed from the ground up to pick up this kind of traffic. We just ignored it for a while. It stopped being relevant. We focused on other technology, other ways of attaching to attack packets. But now attackers have come full circle and realized, hey, you know, just because it's old doesn't mean it doesn't work. And as a matter of fact, it actually works really well. And we're seeing an uptick in this kind of attack vector, or in general these attack vectors, in the cloud. And we'll talk about the relevance of the cloud with regards to certified ethical hacking. And some of our upcoming episodes will have a lot to say about the cloud. Can't really talk about hacking these days without talking about the cloud and virtualization and those technologies and how they interrelate to each other. You can't really do cloud computing today in a way that we defined it formally without the use of virtualization. You can certainly virtualize without the cloud, but it's very hard to do the cloud without virtualization. And so those two are really linked together, and the cloud has really enabled and changed the way we talk about productivity, we talk about information sharing, we talk about collaboration and all those kind of things, and also how we talk about and envision security. Web enabling or cloud enabling a computer interface or a front-end interface or a network today means that we are turning on capabilities that give us great flexibility with regards to management, but also open a tremendous amount of, or at least potentially open up, a tremendous amount of opportunity for the hackers, the bad actors out there, to come knock on that door and seek entry. And we'll show you through some of the labs we'll do, the hands-on exercises, the demos, whatever you wish to call them. We'll show you through some of the tools we will use that all you need is an internet connection or a network connection and the right kind of information, essentially maybe a username and a password, maybe not even that, if we're on the internal network and combined to a machine, in order to manipulate that machine and to do a variety of things. It will hopefully make you much more aware of the kind of challenges you face and also be very illustrative, hopefully, the kind of things that you can do, provided you're willing to spend the time and understand how to do them. And I think together that combination increases awareness and ultimately makes you a better not only security professional, but a better CEH candidate, somebody who looks to get certified and ultimately wants to become a certified ethical hacker. It'll be very important for you to consider those things. When we think about malware, which is another great example of things that are trending today, and we have to think about what's been going on in the last couple of years with malware, we see an increase and a focus primarily on targeting, and this is not new, but targeting executives inside of companies. Phishing in general is on the rise. Spear phishing and whaling, which are very targeted phishing attacks, have been on the rise for several years. Spear phishing going after a specific individual, whaling going after senior management, C-level executives in a company, crafting and targeting the attack to them. There was a recent, I had one of my customers that I'm doing some work with now, as a matter of fact, probably the next month or so after we finish up shooting here, because it may take that long by the time we get done and we actually get through everything. We had a bit of a challenge getting started first thing, but we're rolling along now. But I have a customer coming up probably the next month or so. We're going to do a security awareness solution for them and their entire team. They contacted me 2, 3, 4 weeks ago probably and said, hey, we've got this issue. We're hoping you could help us out. The issue is basically we got phished within the last month, and the way that this phishing attack went down was that somebody from outside was able to essentially send an email purporting to be from the CEO of the company and send it to a variety of people inside the company saying that we were undergoing an audit and we needed everybody to submit usernames and passwords, but also then a separate email went to HR and specifically said, hey, we need all of the W-2 information submitted to me electronically to comply with something that was going on. And so one person in HR actually sent all the W-2 and W-9 forms to this, what turned out to be external bad actor, who walked away with enough information to assume the identity of anybody in the company.
Wow.
And yeah, big wow, right? So as a result, they spent weeks trying to mitigate that, scrambling, doing all sorts of stuff. And then they finally got out of reactive mode long enough to say, hey, clearly really bad. We got to figure this out. We can't let this happen again. We need to have somebody come in, talk to us, figure out what we can do. Wound up ultimately talking to us and to me And we've put together a security awareness training program and a risk assessment seminar for senior management on top of that training program that's going to help them walk through what they need to do differently. But here's the interesting thing. What we found out in interviewing them and talking with them as we did discover to figure out what we could do, one of the very first things I asked was, okay, tell me what happened, great. Explain to me what the outcomes were. Okay, understand, a lot of liability there. You guys are dealing with it by doing this, this, and this, absolutely. So after I, kind of got the basics, first question I asked was, so is there a policy in place at the time the breach occurs that would have made everybody aware of the fact that you as a company do not, under any circumstances, ever request this kind of information be sent or be submitted or be communicated via email without some sort of follow-up phone call, conversation, something that forces the user making the request to identify themselves in a way that is unique and that cannot be spoofed? No, we had no such policy. Okay, clearly we know why the breach occurred, right? Because you essentially are taking at face value communication that can obviously be compromised, and we know that's the issue. And it's amazing how many times we often see in the real world, right? Out in the world out there that all of you and I and Mike and everybody here at IT Pro TV outside of the studio when we're talking to you live in as we do this professionally. It's amazing how many times my customers fall prey to the exact same thing. How many times my students, as I talk to them in classes, fall prey to the same exact thing. They've done a lot of the blocking and tackling, the basic conceptual work on the, hey, we have a system in place to monitor side, the physical building of the barriers, as I often refer to it. They're good at building the enclave boundaries. They're good at setting up the physical layers of defense in depth because they understand they need a firewall. They understand they need a gateway monitoring device. So they have those things in place. But what they don't have ultimately is the ability to manage that thought process and that architecture centrally with policy. And then through policy with process and procedure, drill down and delegate responsibility for implementation through continuous monitoring, bring GRC, governance, risk, and compliance into the mix in order to be able to understand how to validate that those things are going on, standardized and throughout the organization. In other words, they lack all the levers to pull beyond the basic drop and set, right? We build it, we set it, and we walked away. And that's good, but that's not enough. 20 years ago, 10 years ago, it was okay to build the boundary. It was okay to man it or put virtual and real people on it to keep track of it and to walk away and say, okay, that's enough. It's not okay anymore. And we've seen more and more as time goes by that is less and less effective as a security solution in and of itself, unless it's tied to risk management, risk governance, and compliance thought process that allows us to be much broader in our approach. So we have to think about this and really understand this. I know that we have some terminology that we have defined, sir, and if we could put Mike's screen up. There we go. Look at those pretty words. Except we're missing the most important thing up there.
Uh-oh.
We have no vocabulary definitions, so we have to put some out there. So I'm going to talk about what these terms are. We did this on purpose, actually, for you. We just wanted to put the words up. I'm going to walk through them right now and give you some definitions, and then Mike's going to post that up after the show, and we'll actually have a little running vocabulary list for you, and you'll be able to keep track of it. One suggestion, just as a thought process from a studying perspective, would be for you to think about making some flashcards or going through these terms and all the other terms we'll come up against at various points in our conversation, creating a little stack of vocabulary flashcards and doing some minor review with regards to studying. It's always important, always good to have a sense of this vocabulary and to be able to have maybe a one-sentence definition kind of working in your mind if you're asked about how to define the term or potentially how to apply that knowledge on the exam. Remember, we may just simply see hey, what is the definition of this term question, and you have to pull the right answer. Complicated, but not overly complicated if you studied. But what would be more complex would be we see this term used in some sort of a word problem or a scenario, and you have to understand the value of that term and then apply the knowledge, right? So I want to make sure we have a sense of how to do that either way. So let's talk about hack value. A hack value is essentially that something has worth, or among hackers, that something is worth going after. So it's the idea that a hacker in their mind sees an objective as being worthwhile to go after an attack, right? So we may say, if we're working for, let's say, company Y, that our intellectual property, our unique information that makes us the top of our particular industry with regards to what we do would have hack value because a hacker may want to come after it and steal that. Maybe somebody's going to pay them, or they feel they can take it and go make money with it by trying to sell it to our competitor. whatever that may be, right? So it's the value that the hacker or the bad actor perceives in the particular item or issue or thing that they want to do. That is what we define as hack value. Vulnerability, next one down. The classic definition of vulnerability is the existence of a weakness. Just generically, the idea that there's some sort of weakness in a system. We can think of vulnerabilities as being weaknesses in architecture, in design, and implementation, and management, in any area, in other words, right? But very simply, very easily, the existence of a weakness is what we would think of. Yeah, I can't spell to save my life either. I had it right the first time, actually. So, when we think of the existence of a weakness, that's why I have Mike type, by the way, because if you saw me typing, we'd be here forever. You would not be able to read anything, and nothing would make sense. All right, so just make sure you know that the existence of a weakness generically is how we define a vulnerability. Exploit, next one down. The exploit is the concept of a breach of a system of some kind, whatever it may be. So breaching a target system through a vulnerability. So it's not just enough to say, hey, we breached that system. Breach being a fancy term for getting into it, right? We hacked into it. But we have to really say we not only breached it, but we breached it because we took advantage of a vulnerability. We found a weakness, and we were then able to use that weakness to get into the system. That's what we want to make sure we make the connection of there. Payload. When we think about payload, we could be thinking about some sort of software or malware, some sort of exploit code, right? Because we're going to be thinking about some sort of system that delivers something, right? That's the payload, is the thing being delivered. And so traditionally it's software or malware that delivers, in this case, an exploit, right? More often than not. So the exploit code that is being delivered is typically referred to as the payload. You're not the exploit, but the exploit, right? So the exploit of some kind, right? So that's our payload. We often hear that referred to with regards to, as I said, malware or viruses or Trojans. You can think of any of those categories of things that we talk about. Those are all considered to be the payloads when we attack something. Zero-day attack, this is going to be an attack, or sometimes referred to also as a zero-day exploit, essentially the same thing. This is going to exploit a computer application vulnerability, or again, some sort of vulnerability, right? And it is going to take advantage of that vulnerability, but it does so really without the well-publicized knowledge of that vulnerability being made available to everybody. So a lot of times we hear about the fact that this or that software security researcher has found this problem or this issue, and they waited so many days to tell everybody about it, and they went to the company and said, hey, this is an issue, and you should take this seriously. I'm going to share a story with you about this right now. And if somebody attacks and finds that vulnerability and exploits it before we essentially expose it, report it, and put a patch out, we will call it a zero-day exploit or a zero-day attack or zero-day vulnerability. So interesting, last week, again, ripped right from the headlines. I couldn't make this stuff up if I tried, right? I don't know how many of you have a Mitsubishi as a car. If you do, good for you. You may want to think about changing it out, and here's why. So makes the headlines last week. I'm actually in the middle of doing some cloud security work. And so I'm talking to some of my customers about cloud security last week, and I'm reading some headlines before I go into a meeting with them. And sure enough, I see an article on the latest Mitsubishi. It was one of their SUVs. It wasn't I forget what it was specifically, whatever they call their big SUV, but they put out a 2017, so the brand new car year model coming out early this year for 2017. They previewed it, they put it out. Within a few weeks, a British research security company goes out and buys one to do research on it. And within about a week, they find that the way that this particular manufacturer, Mitsubishi, had implemented the use of wireless onboard technology, because now almost every car is coming with enabled wireless on board. The way they implemented it and used it with the app to be able to remotely control the car was a little bit different than what everybody else is doing. Most of the big vendors have done this, but they're running that connection through a secure cloud, and you have to log into a vendor-controlled website, multi-factor authentication, and then they find the PID or the ID for the car, and then they connect you essentially. It's like a secure RDP tunnel or a session into the car, but through a secure website. That's the way most vendors are implementing it. There are challenges with that could be hacked as well, but Mitsubishi went a different process. They're using near-field Wi-Fi. So essentially, you've got to be within about 30 feet of the car with the phone or the app for it to be able to activate and work. You're not going through the cloud. This is not something you could do remotely from a million miles away, which in and of itself, I don't know. I don't know what people are thinking. If I'm within 30 feet, I don't need you to give me an app to be able to, it just doesn't make sense. But anyway, point is, you got to be close to the car. But what they found was that because of the way this was being implemented, that it was hackable. And they had not implemented, same old story we'll talk about in one of the upcoming episodes with wireless and hacking, with regards to not that they used web, because that really would have been tragically funny, but how not to build a secure car in 10 steps. But they did essentially implement a newer version of a wireless security protocol, but basically blew the architecture and the implementation. They didn't do it correctly. Same kind of issues and concerns we have if we historically go back and look at what went on with web. If you know anything about that, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you don't, tune in for the upcoming episodes about that. We'll quickly go through that history and talk about what went wrong and how you do it the right way as part of discussing how to hack in the wireless world. But essentially, they made very similar mistakes. And then on top of it, they compounded that by not having anybody from a security background go and review what they had done to implement the system. And so they put it out there, didn't test it, and the security firm figured out that there were all these weaknesses, went to the vendor. Mitsubishi is a Japanese car manufacturer, went to the vendor in Japan and said essentially, hey, we found all this concern and issues, you should take a look at this. Mitsubishi just blew them off and said, we're not interested, we don't care. They waited, they tried several times, they couldn't get through to Mitsubishi, make them see the light of day. They finally, and this is the ongoing struggle in our community. Researchers find this stuff, and there's this argument about the moral and ethical dilemmas associated with essentially outing this kind of a weakness, because they went to the vendor, did all the right things, the vendor did not take them on. Finally, they published a paper about this concern and said essentially, we're going to expose it. The vendor had their chance. The minute they did that, Mitsubishi got on the phone and was like, oh my God, why didn't you come to us?
Why could you do this to us?
And listen, they're a big company, I get it, maybe they weren't talking to the right people. I'm not suggesting for a minute Mitsubishi wouldn't take this stuff seriously. Since that's become public knowledge, they've been very proactive at trying to deal with it. Maybe the message wasn't getting through, and those things happen. I mean, that's just the way things are. But reality is, when we think about something like a zero-day attack, this was pretty significant. They were able to get into the onboard control systems, same kind of flaws that the Tesla Model S had, this past year when they came out, where essentially it was shown you could hack in, and Tesla has actually gone a very interesting way in this. They're the first car company in particular, but one of the very first companies overall that has not only web-enabled their product, but done so with the express declared strategic intention of doing over-the-wire updates to firmware and instructional patches to the system to be able to operate it, and committed that that's how they're going to do their update cycles for their software, for the onboard controllers. Very interesting, very innovative, but they had some issues. They tried to correct them, and good for them, and that's great. But again, got to think about what's going on, and you're putting your system, in this case, something that goes down the road at maybe 100 miles an hour or more, right? Into the hands, essentially, of a bad actor who may take it away from you while you're driving. I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that will happen. I'm not suggesting that it could happen right now. I'm not suggesting any of you are in any way in danger. I don't want anybody to panic about this if you're not familiar with what's going on. But I want you to understand that there is potential liability there. It's been shown time and again in the last couple of years that almost every major car manufacturer has vulnerabilities in these implementations that, under certain conditions, can be compromised. And there is that possibility that somebody may take advantage of these systems. So we have to understand that. There was an issue a couple of years back. I talked about this in my CISSP conversations with you that Mike and I did, and some of the other classes that I've done on IT Pro TV and some of the other areas with regards to security certifications. I think in the CASP, the CompTIA CASP, we mentioned this as well. We talked about the fact that there's an issue in the avionics industry with this, and the fact that the onboard wireless on the plane was essentially linked to the same control systems that give you onboard access to the avionics network that essentially controls all the stuff in the cockpit. And at a certain point in time, those two were not firewalled off in a meaningful way, and you could leap between those networks if you knew what you were doing, and knowing what you're doing didn't take a lot of horsepower up here. It was not very complicated. And thankfully, as of now, those things are being modified, rectified, and are being retrofitted to be more secure. But that was an ongoing issue for a period of time in that industry as well. We see the same kind of concerns in the various industries that are using ICS and SCADA systems, cyber-physical embedded operating systems that are controlling nuclear power plants, that are controlling oil and gas generation. Again, I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting that we're about to have a nuclear meltdown or somebody's going to hack into a nuclear power plant just because they've exposed those systems in an unsafe way. Quite the opposite. They are heavily monitored for the most part in those industries. But there's always the liability there that if we don't do the right things, a zero-day attack may be used to take advantage of a vulnerability. And let's be honest, there's a lot of vulnerabilities in these systems we know about. There's even more we don't know about. And we're finding out about all the time just because nobody's ever used them that way until somebody goes and says, hey, what would 2 plus 5 equal in that scenario? If it doesn't equal 7, let's look at that because maybe we can use that to our advantage. Should be 7, right? 2 plus 2
1,
plus
2,
5.
3, 4, yeah.
7, right? So I got to always do that with fingers and toes. That's, very important because I am horrible. I'm really horrible at math. But you get the idea, right? All kidding aside, this is really big stuff. This is one of the most important things, not only as a CEH, as a certified ethical hacker, you can be focused on, but as a generic IT professional, as a security professional, knowledge of and awareness of the current vulnerabilities that are arrayed against your systems, knowing that you've, as to the most and to the best of your abilities, taken steps to prevent them and mitigate them, and that you're on guard against unusual behavior. This is how you find zero-day exploits, by the way. There's no magic wand. Nobody's sitting out there with a hit list of things saying, okay, in 2 days, this is what you go do, right? People just are looking constantly and probing constantly to see what we can do. What you need to do as a certified security professional of any kind, under any banner, from any vendor, anywhere in the world, I don't care who it is and what you do, or just somebody who's knowledgeable that never gets a certification at all, because you don't need to go certify in order to be good at what you do. You can get knowledge and be very hands-on and very knowledgeable and never ever take a certification exam. Whatever you do, you have to understand that it's looking for the unusual in the patterns of everyday life that we monitor every day in our networks that expose the potential liabilities that we then have to think about how to address. This is how we find things when we're defending. This is how people that are looking to attack also look for things. They look for unusual behavior and they figure out what is causing that to see if they can take advantage of it. It's the study of the unknown, in other words, that makes us better at what we do. And that's one of the key secrets to being good at that. We're done. Can I throw the mic down? Can we walk out now?
Absolutely.
You actually don't need to watch anything else. We're all done. We do have some more vocabulary to go through before we do
one
that,
more at least.
We do. Well, actually, 3 more.
Okay.
Unless I'm short on my list. I think you have some stuff down below there.
Okay.
All right. So daisy chaining. Let's talk about that one. This is the idea of connecting things together, right? If you're familiar with how USB or SCSI devices can be interconnected and networked through each other or linked together, it's essentially the concept. We'll apply this and talk about this when we talk about the use of anonymizing proxies, for instance, right? To be able to connect to a system but hide where we're coming from. Things like the Tor browser and the Tor network that allow us to essentially, if we do it the right way and it's implemented correctly, use software that anonymizes and hides our point of reference or our point of origin from the world. This is the kind of thing that daisy chaining allows us to do. We gain access to one system by connecting other systems together and then walking through them, or we potentially hide behind a daisy chained group of systems that obfuscate and minimize our footprint to the outside world so that you can't see or know who we are. Doxing is the idea of publishing personally identifiable information, what we call PI, traditionally as an acronym, putting that information out there about you or others and essentially outing that information and making it available. That's what we call doxing. Now, traditionally, that information may come from publicly available systems, but it may also come from a mixture of public and private if we're hacking and putting that stuff out there in a breach, right? So personally identifiable information. We always want to spell out those acronyms. Always very important to make sure we know what they are, and then we know the acronym as well. And then a bot is a remote control or a piece of software that is used traditionally to be a remote control element to create what are called botnets, sometimes referred to as a zombie machine. A machine's been zombied, as a machine's been taken over and is being controlled with some sort of software. A bot and a zombie often are seen as interchangeable terms. So some sort of software used to remotely control or gain remote access to a system. Old school way of thinking about it, more common, more cool, and innovative way of thinking about it today, given all the stuff that goes on in the world. We talk about zombies and the zombie apocalypse.
That's right. Got to tie it back to zombies.
Yeah, got to tie it back to zombies. That's kind of cool, right? All right, so just some vocabulary to think about and to be aware of, to go through, just setting the stage, if you will, right? Kind of laying down some foundational knowledge and helping you to better understand the context of the things we're going to be continuing to talk about in some upcoming episodes.
Very good, Adam. You know, a great look again, as you just said, as a kind of an overview of what we can expect coming up, and really starting to lay that foundational knowledge that's very important for us to be able to understand the more advanced topics as we go through. So we appreciate that. Some great real-world examples too to help us really, you know, take that from that theory and see really what it's like out there, as I said, in the real world.
Are you saying we're keeping it real?
We're keeping it real.
Oh, I love that. Keeping it real.
All right, Adam, we appreciate that. Hope everybody out there enjoyed watching. Signing off for IT Pro TV, I'm Mike Roderick.
I'm Adam Gordon.
And we'll see you next time.
The real Adam Gordon.